All right, today we are digging into one of the most just lopsided and frankly bizarre conflicts in all of military history. It's the story of a fleet that sailed halfway around the world only to get completely, utterly annihilated.
So let's get right into it. You've got this massive fleet sailing 15,000 miles to fight Japan, right? But its very first victim is a British fisherman? How does that even happen? Well, it all starts not with a big naval bang, but with this tragic, almost unbelievable mistake right in the middle of the North Sea. And honestly, this one single moment, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the doomed voyage of the Tsar's last armada.
Right, so this first part, we're calling it a phantom menace. And that's because this whole event, this Dogger Bank incident, it just perfectly captures the toxic cocktail of paranoia and sheer incompetence that was plaguing the Russian Baltic fleet long before they ever laid eyes on an actual enemy.
I mean, just listen to this. This was the reaction from the British press at the time, and it is just scathing. It really hits on the sheer absurdity of it all. You have to remember the whole world was watching this unfold, and they were just completely bewildered. How could this happen?
So let's break it down. The fleet was absolutely convinced, just paranoid, that they were about to be ambushed by Japanese torpedo boats. The problem? They were 15,000 miles from Japan, and their targets? They were just British fishing boats. In all the chaos, the Russian ships even started firing on each other. The result? 2 British fishermen dead, and a Russian chaplain and a sailor killed by friendly fire. I mean, it almost started a war with Britain. So this wasn't just some random mistake, right? It was a massive symptom of a much, much deeper problem. Which begs the question, how on earth did a major world power get into this state of utter chaos?
Okay, Section 2, the trapped fleet. So to really get why this journey even happened, we need to rewind a bit back to the start of the war, because it all kicks off with a massive strategic disaster for Russia.
So what led to all this? Well, it was really a classic case of competing empires. You see, back in 1895, Japan wins a war and gets this key strategic port, Port Arthur. But then Russia, Germany, and France step in and basically force them to give it up. Then, just a few years later, in a huge slap in the face, Russia leases that same port from China for itself. You can imagine how Japan felt. Tensions just kept rising, especially over who would control Manchuria and Korea. For Japan, Russian expansion into Korea was, well, they saw it as a strategic dagger pointed right at their heart. So in early 1904, they decided to act.
And that surprise attack was a huge success for Japan. I mean, it was stunning. They basically crippled Russia's Pacific Fleet, bottling up their best ships right there in Port Arthur. Suddenly, Japan controls the seas, and Russia's whole war effort in the Far East is in serious, serious trouble. So Russia had one last desperate option on the table. They decided to send their other fleet, the Baltic Fleet, on this absolutely epic 15,000-mile journey all the way around the world to try and save the day. I mean, nothing like this had ever really been tried before. It was a total Hail Mary. They were throwing together brand new, super complicated battleships with old, creaky vessels that were falling apart, all of it crewed by guys who barely knew what they were doing.
And this brings us to the journey itself, which, let's just call it the Voyage of the Damned, because it quickly turned into this string of disasters that are almost darkly funny. That whole incident with the fishing boats, that wasn't a one-off. Oh no, it was just a taste of what was to come.
I mean, look at this list. It's like a comedy of errors. They shot at a German trawler and a Swedish merchant ship, and missed both, by the way. They dropped an anchor and accidentally cut the main telegraph cable for Tangiers. You had officers getting hooked on opium cigarettes. They filled the ships with exotic animals. We're talking crocodiles and lions, which, surprise, surprise, got loose and started mauling the crew. At one point, during a funeral salute, one ship fired a live shell that almost wiped out another Russian cruiser. This whole thing points to a complete and total breakdown of discipline. The fleet was just this chaotic mess of green recruits, guys the government suspected were revolutionaries, and officers were apparently more interested in souvenir shopping for exotic pets than actually, training for war.
And if you want numbers, just look at this. This tells the whole story. Back at that Dogger Bank incident, the battleship Oriole fired over 500 shells. 500! And how many hits did they get on the targets they were actually aiming for? 0. Not one. That's not just bad luck. That's a clear, blinking sign of systemic, deep-rooted incompetence.
Okay, this next part, you honestly could not make this up. So after months of this paranoid journey, seeing phantom enemies everywhere, they finally spot an actual Japanese ship. And what do? They mistake it for a friendly Russian vessel. And then they helpfully signal it, telling it their exact location.
After 15,000 miles of trying to get there in secret, they just blow their own cover. This one moment of pure foolishness just perfectly sets the stage for the final battle. Which brings us to the final act, Annihilation at Tsushima. So it's May 27, 1905. After 7 long, grueling months at sea, the totally exhausted and demoralized Russian fleet finally sails into the Tsushima Strait and meets the very well-prepared, very well-trained Japanese Navy that's been waiting for it.
And this is where we see the tactical genius of the Japanese admiral, Togo. He pulls off this incredibly high-risk maneuver that naval guys have been talking about for years, crossing the T. Okay, so think about it like this. The Russian fleet is coming forward in this long, messy column like the stem of the letter T. Togo swings his fleet right across their path, forming the top bar of the T. What does that do? It means all of his ships can fire all of their main guns at the lead Russian ships. But the Russians? They can only fire the few guns they have pointing forward. He could bring his entire fleet's firepower down on 1 or 2 Russian ships at a time. It was devastating.
5,000. That's the number of Russian sailors killed or captured. The battle wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. I mean, out of 38 Russian ships that sailed into that fight, 31 were either sunk or captured. The Tsar's navy was basically wiped off the face of the earth in a single afternoon.
And the Japanese casualties? 117 killed. The contrast is just staggering. Japan didn't lose a single major warship. It goes down in the books as one of the most decisive, most lopsided naval victories in all of modern history. Just wow.
So why? Why did Russia lose so spectacularly? Well, it wasn't just about one battle, or one bad admiral, or even one bad journey. The loss was systemic. It was rooted in these really deep problems inside the crumbling Russian Empire itself.
Okay, so here's a key concept. While other modern navies were starting to use ideas like the German Auftrags tactic, which is basically mission command, right? You tell your subordinates what to do, but you trust them to figure out how to do it, the Russian Navy did the exact opposite. They punished anyone who showed initiative. Their officers were just products of this super rigid, bureaucratic machine where the #1 rule was don't get blamed. They were literally more afraid of getting a nasty letter from a boss in St. Petersburg than they were of the enemy.
And this difference was also philosophical. It was about how they even thought about naval warfare. Russia was obsessed with this grand idea from theorists like Mahan. You fight one big, decisive battle to win command of the sea. It sounds great, but it's super inflexible, and they just didn't have the training or logistics to make it happen. Japan, on the other hand, was way more pragmatic. They followed ideas closer to what Corbett was writing about. For them, it wasn't about one glorious battle. It was about using their navy to achieve specific, limited goals, like making sure their army could land safely. It was a strategy that was perfectly tailored to what they actually needed to do. So, if we pull the lens back even further and use this idea from the military theorist Clausewitz, he called it the Trinity, the whole picture really snaps into focus. The idea is that a nation's ability to fight depends on 3 things working together: the government, the military, and the people. And look at the difference. Japan was totally unified. They had a clear government policy, a modern and disciplined military, and a population that was passionately behind the war. And Russia? It was a nation that was literally about to collapse from the inside out. An indecisive czar, a poorly trained military, and a people simmering with revolutionary anger. It was rotten from the top all the way down. And the fallout from this one battle? The echoes were felt almost immediately, all around the world. It would end up reshaping the entire 20th century.
So let's look at the consequences, because they were huge. The war ends with Teddy Roosevelt, of all people, mediating the peace treaty. But the big thing is, Japan suddenly arrives on the world stage as the first modern, non-Western global power. For Russia, this humiliating defeat was one of the main sparks for the 1905 Russian Revolution, which nearly toppled the Tsar. And for everyone else, the sheer scale of the loss made every major navy terrified of risking their entire fleet in one big battle. That thinking would directly influence naval strategy heading into World War I. So yeah, the fallout went way beyond just Russia and Japan.
So, can a single afternoon of battle really reshape the world? Well, the story of the Tsar's last armada seems to prove that, yeah, sometimes it absolutely can. It shows that a nation's fate isn't just about the weapons it has. It's about the competence, the morale, and the will of the people using those weapons. And sometimes, like what happened in the Tsushima Strait, that final verdict gets delivered in one single brutal afternoon. Thanks for joining this explainer.